performance and resources. Can I remind you all that this is going to be a recorded meeting, and that any comments in the chat will also be part of the permanent record of this meeting, please. A few housekeeping issues here. When you're speaking, if you want to speak, could you put your hands up function on, please? That's one thing. And secondly, if you could also make sure that when you're not speaking, that you mute yourself in order to avoid any background noise, because that is also very important. Could you also make sure that if you do need to speak, okay, that you wait your turn, as it were. I will have a list of people that need to speak using the hands up function. Please use your hands up there until you have spoken. Once you have spoken, could you put your hands down function there? Otherwise, I will have to intervene and put your hands down function myself, which I do have the access to do that. Okay, let's make a start now. Okay, first of all, apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies for absence, Karen?
No, Chair. No.
Thank you very much. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of October. Are you happy for me to sign them? Anyone proposing? Yeah, yes. Councillor Cox, yeah, and Councillor Drake, and
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, any declarations of interest? No, good. Okay, we're now moving on to the references. The first one, which I believe Tom Bowen is presenting, is developing a climate change action plan. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's okay with you, I've pulled together some slides to accompany this item rather than just taking you through the Cabinet report.
Fine.
So I'll just share that with you.
Thank you very much.
Bear with me. Can I just double check that you can see that?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okie dokie.
Brilliant.
So this is a reference from Cabinet to yourselves, committee, in terms of giving an update on the work that's being done to develop a climate change action plan for the council. Cabinet have requested that you consider this update and share any views in terms of how the work is being progressed. We've also shared this report with all members of the council as well as town and community councils, and we've shared it with the Voluntary Sector Joint Liaison Committee as well for their information, because it's such a broad-ranging topic. Back in July 2019, the council declared a climate emergency, and shown on this slide are the four elements of that declaration. So there was a commitment to reduce the council's carbon emissions to net zero before the target of 2030 set by Welsh Government. The council also contended to make representations to government at both Welsh and UK levels to provide powers and resources to help facilitate that. A commitment to work with partners across the region, and I'll mention that, as well as then working with local stakeholders, because clearly this is not something that is just within the gift of the organisation to be able to progress. And I think it's important to say that back in July 2019, and certainly now, this is not coming from a standing start. There was significant away across the organisation, and we've got a strong history of progressing this agenda. So examples of this are outlined in the Cabinet report and include things like 100% of the council's energy being procured from renewable sources. 13 of our sites have got photovoltaic panels on them. We've completed LED conversion of 67% of the street lights. There's a huge commitment in terms of the way that we work to this agenda. So we've signed up to the Public Services Board Healthy Travel Charter. We've got flood risk alleviation plans in place. We were discussing just before committee about the introduction of Next bikes in Penarth, and the council has also worked very hard to move towards a pool car arrangement over the last few years to reduce mileage. And clearly in the last few months, there's been a massive shift to people working from home. So the challenge here is about how we build on that and we take it forward. And on the 23rd of March, it's a date that lots of people will remember now, but it's not just remembered for lockdown being announced at 7 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, Cabinet considered a report about the progress that we were making on climate change and the emergency declaration. And that was framed very much in the sense that we were developing a charter with the Public Services Board about how we could work regionally to progress this. And we were talking at that time about wanting to run a climate change conversation right across the Vale to really understand how we could progress this agenda. Clearly, things changed that evening, but work didn't stop on taking forward the work on climate change. And here you've just got some summaries of the work that's been happening in the last 8 or 9 months, despite the restrictions imposed by coronavirus. So street lighting improvements have continued. Members will note that the rollout of recycling arrangements within Barry has progressed, and they've been implemented from the middle of October. We've continued work in terms of the 21st Century Schools programme with very minimal disruption to that programme. Improvements to the housing stock have continued. Active travel has been actively promoted over this period. We've seen shifts in the way that people travel and the way that people use their vehicles and stay more locally. And we've continued with tree and wildflower planting to improve green infrastructure. So lots of work has continued. And I remember at committee in July and then month we talked about the recovery priorities, and one of the things that Cabinet have made very clear in our recovery strategy is their commitment to wanting to see a green infrastructure a green recovery element playing into recovery. So these are taken from the recovery strategy, and you'll see that there's a commitment to re-energise the work around climate change, to look at how we progress active travel, to encourage people to sustain changes in their travel patterns, commitments around refuse and recycling, supporting our own workforce as well to work from home and to work in different ways, and looking at our digital service offerings as a way of reducing the need for people to travel, and a very strong commitment around involving, engaging and consulting our residents as well. There are other influences to this work. Shown here are the logos for the Public Services Board, and back in July we ran a reflective learning session with the Public Services Board about how were they approaching recovery. And I know we talked about that at committee in the summer, but also about how we could potentially look to work together. And at the December meeting of the PSB, we're looking for approval for a charter that will help shape the actions of the organisation. And at committee last month, I also talked to you about the Future Generations report that Sophie Howe has published in the last few months, and that contains a significant number of priorities and areas of focus that are associated with this agenda as well. So taking all of that into consideration, we've looked to try and bring these things together, and at the moment these 7 working themes. So these span from energy to technology, how we procure, the important role that we have in terms of leadership, elements of travel, recycling, and also then the use of our land and buildings. And what my team have done, and there's a link in the Cabinet report to these discussion papers so that members can access them. And I'll also ask Karen and colleagues if they can circulate this presentation after your meeting, Chair. But for each of those 7 themes, we've set out in discussion papers the ambition that we have as an organisation. So looking at our corporate plan commitments that are associated with these, looking at our current position. So there are details under each about the work that is currently underway. how this links and weaves with the other work that is going on. So that might be at a national level in terms of that Future Generations report. It might be at a local level in terms of the PSB's agenda. We've set out a series of risks associated with them and identified some short, medium and long-term potential actions that could be taken. And they're quite interesting, those discussion papers, because they really do show the breadth of work, but also the potential that exists within this arena. So the task that we've been set is to bring a plan together, and we could go about a very traditional plan where we set out a series of actions with some targets and some measures, and then every quarter I could bring a report on how we're doing about each of them. And I think it does need to have elements of that, definitely. But it also needs to be something that sets out how we challenge ourselves and others to take action to tackle climate change. It needs to bring all of those myriad of things I've just described together. It's important that it sets the tone for the organisation. So our organisational values are shown on the screen here, and there does need to be that ambition and honesty, and we need to show how we're going to go about doing this. And fundamentally, it feels to us as if this is how we were thinking in 2014 and 15 about things like the corporate plan and Future Generations. This is about a fundamental shift in how we work. And then we also need to show how we link with the PSB climate change chart. So there's lots to do in a very dynamic plan, is how it feels. And I've just got a couple of examples here of some of the work that we've started to do internally in terms of developing knowledge, interests, skills. As part of Climate Week recently, we've been sharing examples with our colleagues of work that is underway. You can see the Insight Board logo here. They've been really instrumental because they bring together experience from across the organisation, and they've helped shape the work that is contained within those discussion papers. And then what's been really encouraging is we've been running a series of mid-morning or lunchtime discussion sessions over the last few weeks, and there are more planned for the coming weeks, where anybody can drop in and contribute to these ideas. And all of this knowledge and ideas are being gathered within those discussion papers, which are being updated on a regular basis. And then what I'm showing you on this slide is some of the work that we've got planned in terms of external involvement and engagement. So we're going to run some light touch. It's not quite a quiz, it's not quite a poll, but trying to understand what people's knowledge and understanding of the kind of impact that climate change is having, and that people's personal behaviour is maybe having on climate change, and also to elicit some ideas from our residents and public. So watch this space for some work going out on our social media feeds shortly. And we're also going to be making sure that as part of some of the other planned consultation and engagement work, so things like the annual delivery plan that I'll be here talking about next month, but also the budget and some of the specific projects. So any of our Section 106 projects that we consult on, the green infrastructure strategy, which is under development, those kind of things will again feed this kind of knowledge. So the purpose, Chair, as I said, was to bring this to you as an update in terms of how that work is progressing, together any views that you have as a committee, and then we would look to bring back a draft of this early in the new year, with a view that we then will build on it and publish a plan next year.
Thank you very much for that, Tom. I really appreciate that. It was an excellent presentation. And now it's over to members, please. Councillor Carroll, first of all. Councillor Carroll?
Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you, Tom, for that presentation, and thank you, Chair. Just a question really in relation to the resourcing of this. I note in the report that reference is made to £4.9 million for the current financial year towards responding to the climate emergency. I would just be keen, I don't want a full breakdown, but just to see a few examples of what that money is going for. Basically, the reason I ask that is obviously if it's to do things like PR, consultation exercises, climate week, promoting things, that sort of thing, and that's a good budget. But if you're talking major infrastructure changes that are going to be needed at some point, then it's not really going to touch the surface. So I'd just be grateful for some information on the resources that have been allocated to date on this.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to respond to that, Tom?
Yeah, I can do, and if it's okay with you, Councillor Carroll, I can provide you with some information after the committee, just so that I can have an opportunity to have a conversation with Caris to understand what the spend against that particular reserve is. I suppose the important point it's a really interesting and useful point for you to make, because actually that's a specific reserve associated with this activity, but the challenge, I suppose, for me in terms of trying to draw the plan together is that one particular reserve or that one particular fund doesn't encompass the whole of the activity that we would see within the scope of this particular work. So actually it's about how we draw together the various activity that is underway and that is funded, but bring it together so that it has maximum value by being done consistently and coherently within this overall plan. But in terms of the expenditure against that particular fund, I can certainly get details for you after the meeting. Okay. I can assure you that I haven't been given £1.9 million by the Section 151 officer to do PR. I can only hope for a communications budget like that.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Ian Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Tom, for the presentation. I thought you brought what was possibly a quite dry process report to life by explaining some of the examples within that. I think that the most important thing here is the timetable, and obviously it's been very difficult with COVID, but being able to stick to that timetable and bringing forward actionable and measurable proposals, I think, is very important. I do think I think the most exciting thing there perhaps is the other 7 different work streams that are underway. I think perhaps those should have been highlighted slightly more in the cabinet report, because I think that's the action, and that's where people can get involved and see what's going on. In terms of clarification of what's going forward, obviously this is. I'm looking to understand to what extent the development plan as it goes forward will be focused broadly around the council and what the council can deliver, and to what extent there will be alignment. We've discussed obviously the PSB, so we work within the general public sector, but also I'm just wondering quite what the buy-in is on a Cardiff Capital Region basis, where obviously we have both economic and transport committees, which are some of those things largely associated with emissions, etc., and also business within the county area. We have obviously farming, airport, sort of industrial complexes, which are very important. So I'd be interested to know quite what that level of alignment or influencing is going to look like as we go forward. Thank you.
I believe Councillor Burnett wants to come in. Do you want to come in now, Liz?
I can either come in now or I can come in once other members have spoken. I just was flagging up that I would like to speak at some point.
That's all right. If you can come in after other members have spoken, that would be terrific. Thank you. Anyone else like to speak before we bring in the Deputy Leader? Okay. All right. I'd like to speak there in that case. All right.
Councillor John's indicated.
Who? Councillor John. Oh, he did raise his hand. He lowered it, so I wasn't quite sure. Councillor John, do you want to speak now?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I did press the digit where it says raise your hand. I pressed it and it said then lower your hand, but it obviously doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I wanted to ask Tom is, are all departments switched in to the climate change? Because after it went through council in July 2019, a few months later, in planning, 2 planning applications for Lantred Major gave permission for 34 trees to be taken down. Now, many of these trees were in good condition. It really kicked up people locally, and we somehow, as local members, had to defend the council's decision. 13 of the trees was on to make space for 4 houses in a large garden, and the other 21 trees were at St Ildridge Church. Basically, written into this, there were some trees to be replaced, but at this time, virtually a year later, no trees have been replaced as yet, and I'm very interested to see if they'll ever be replaced. But I think, we all got to be working in this together. If we're not all switched on, and if planning are going to just allow trees to be demolished, well, where does the rest of us stand? Thank you, Tom.
Okay, do you want to respond to that, Tom?
Yes, certainly, and perhaps if once I've done that, would you like me to respond to Councillor Johnson's points as well, Chair?
Yeah, and I got a few points as well. You might as well respond to me myself as well. Just a couple of things. Okay, now obviously, if you look at the report, okay, in particular on page 10, in particular, obviously we got like a timetable coming up, and I know that in terms of the cabinet reference, the leader has made reference to that, and obviously I think that's a very exciting timetable, and I know the action plan is going to be approved by council. I just wondered when corporate resources and the economy scrutiny committee are going to be looking at that action plan before then. Are they going to look at that, or are we only going to have a look at it when it's published in April? And my other question is obviously it's initiatives. I know that one of the initiatives which I'm really delighted about, and I know many Penarth people are, is the electric bike scheme, which we're really pleased about. And I know that people in Surrey also want the part of the scheme, which is also good. And I think many other areas I was talking about before we joined the meeting, the lovely topography we got in Barry in particular. And I know that Councillor Thomas referred to the area of St Athan as well, and the access to Clanwick Major. And I just wondering perhaps if we could be looking at extending the scheme wholesale in the Vale Glamorgan, and the Vale Glamorgan then will be a pathfinder to other councils doing this. Because, and the other thing I was going to ask you is when we're going to link in with the next bike scheme in Cardiff, because again, I get people who live on West Bay in particular, with borders upon Penarth, by the Pontevarian Bridge, because a lot of them think they live in Penarth anyway, see them, would like to link in with that scheme as well. And I think that would be quite good if we can. Also, how do we track these electric vehicles? Is there a little app that you can see them or whatever, or do you have access to such a scheme, and how well that they utilise? And the results of electric bikes, do they go anywhere within the council? Is there a monitoring scheme, as it were, as to where they go in terms of destinations? Because again, I think from a marketing perspective, that would be incredibly useful to find out where people go on there. Okay, I know Peter King wants to come in on this. Peter, do you want to come in on that specific question about that, Peter? Or do you want to wait later, Peter? Okay, do you want to answer that now, Peter? Can you do that? Okay, perhaps maybe we wait for Peter to join us. Okay, so I need to switch on his mic. All right, I'll see if I can do that. Okay.
I think I've got it now.
You think you've done it. You think you've done it now. Do you want to say something, Peter?
Yeah, the bikes, the e-bikes are primarily a trial in Penarth. We'll roll out as far as we can, as in the light of experience and all the rest of it, and money and funding. If you if you register, I find it amusing when I go to bed at night to go and look where all the bikes are, because it took me a while to twig that the reason they're parked. I know I'm very sad, but there were a whole clutch of them down at West Point Industrial Estate, and I eventually twigged that was the garage where they're taken back for checking out, because I couldn't work out why the hell are they all there. So you can see where they are. They're being tracked all the time. On your own account, you can work out where you've been and what you've done. And I'm sure e-bikes keep a very close eye. As far as Cardiff's concerned, we're a bit disappointed. We managed for once to overtake them. They've had the pedal bikes for ages, and we thought we were going to try and launch e-bikes across both, because at the moment, if you take an e-bike to Cardiff and leave it there, you'll get charged an extra 20 quid. You need to bring it back out on this side of the River Ely or we'll fine you. So it'll be nice when Cardiff joins us. I think that's some of the things you were asking about.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. Tom, do you want to respond to the other points, please?
Yes, and thank you to Councillor King, because I didn't have the knowledge about the next bikes operation. So in terms of the question around the timetable you asked, Chair, the anticipation is that we will bring this back to scrutiny before publication. The indicative date, which is in the Cabinet report, is February of next year. So there will certainly be an opportunity for members of Scrutiny Committee to consider what the shape of that plan is beginning to look like. So that will certainly be the case. Councillor John asked about the linking in of all departments, and we're at great pains, I suppose, to bring together colleagues from across the organisation in terms of shaping this. I hope that one of the characteristics of what I've just described is that this isn't a sort of traditional plan that a couple of us in policy have sat in our kitchens and written. This is something that we really are reaching out across the organisation to try and pull together. And whilst there's a huge amount of work going on, the point that you raise around planning, for example, is a really good example of how there are competing agendas here. And actually, this is sometimes part of how we look to try and bring these things together, and actually how our decision making is important in different arenas, and at the same time trying to balance those things. Councillor Johnson made the really important point around the timetable and around the need to focus in on activity and impact. One of the things that we've reached out to some Welsh Government colleagues for some advice around is how you measure impact. When you have a look at the discussion papers in those 7 themes, you'll see that there's a variety of different sort of levels of action that could potentially be taken, some of which will be very quick and easy, other things more difficult and more challenging. And the thing that I'm looking forward to learning from that relationship with Welsh Government that is appreciated is understanding how we prioritise the things that have big impact, whilst also continuing to do work that has that smaller contribution but in a shorter time scale. And the alignment with the PSB Charter is really important, and it's a good point around the capital region, and that's something I'd like to take away and explore with my colleagues in planning and economic regeneration. In terms of the business reach out, I'm really keen that as part of this, there's a really strong community leadership aspect to it. So the consultation or the engagement work that we do will look to elicit the views of employers as well as residents, and residents of different ages, employers of different sizes, because I think the point that you were raising demonstrates the fact that there's lots that we could do as an organisation that we will do. Cabinet have made it very clear that that's a commitment, but actually the collective impact is obviously much greater from industry and our domestic residents as well. So the plan will have aspects of community leadership associated with it, which is what I was describing in terms of setting the tone.
Okay, can I thank you very much for that, Tom? Before I bring Councillor Burnett in, does anyone else want to make any other points that they haven't yet made? Okay, that's fine. Liz, do you want to come in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. Absolutely superb presentation by Tom. So no content to add, but just a few points of emphasis, if I could. When we declared a climate emergency, we talked about the need both to work, firstly, to work internally and to actually find new ways of working within the council. But we did talk about working with partners, and that's why Tom's talked about working with the PSB. Interestingly, other partners are the other local authorities that we work with, and I know that most within the city region have also declared climate emergencies, as has Welsh Government. So we're all on the same page on that. Peter might want to come back in. I know that he attended an active travel meeting today. I know because he was WhatsApping me through most of the meeting to tell me points of discussion, and that sounded like a very productive meeting. I note that Laith is in the meeting, and last year we launched a very successful bike to work scheme, getting our own house in order, and I invested in an e-bike, which means that I've actually got rid of my car, which is proving to be quite a challenge, but I no longer have my own car. So we work with others, we work with partners, but also in terms of community leadership, about this whole thing about being a catalyst to others also to act. And I've had many productive conversations with local residents about things that they want to do, and I think that they will want to participate. Councillor Carroll mentioned about money and what we're going to spend. Yes, obviously there are costs to this, but this is not about doing necessarily more things, it's about doing different things. And just to give you an example of something just quite small, this morning I received an email from an education officer who reminded me that I pointed out some funding from Natural Resources Wales last year related to the provision of fruit trees. And she made contact with them with the result that as of now, so far, she says, 22 schools have been issued with 5 fruit trees each in the Vale. And as she said, equally as importantly, the training and resources from NRW to look after them. So sometimes the things that we do will be quite small, but I think being in a school with fruit trees where you can go and harvest the fruit actually could make quite a difference, not only to our children, but to the pollinators that are around in that area and the way that the children learn about that. So sometimes this is going to be small things. Sometimes it's going to be major things like changing our lighting systems over to more sustainable sources. But hopefully, with all the various actions, we will ultimately make a huge difference within the Vale, but also with partners across Wales. Thank you, Chair.
That's right, and thank you very much for that. Really appreciate everyone's contributions today. I think we're all very excited about the changes that could occur. And the other point I was going to make that I forgot to make is electric charging points as well, because I know many places now are starting to put them in. And it would be good to have them in the civic offices as well in Barry and other places as well, like major high schools in particular. And I just wondering perhaps that could also be part of the action plan as well going forward, because I do think that's something that we could also be looking at, as well as obviously we've got great facilities of car sharing at the civic offices. But again, more about that as well, because I do think that's an area that we could explore a bit further. But and also, I know you made reference in the cabinet report, Liz, regarding the new schools and the and also the zero carbon or even negative carbon that hopefully we can look at. So I think, thank you very much for all that. Has anyone got any final comments? Councillor King wants to come in. Do you want to come in, Councillor King?
If I may, it was just picking up your point about charging points. It's one of the issues that some of us are beginning to flag up, that the generating capacity of Wales and the distribution capacity of the grid is not capable of replacing the petrol and diesel that we currently burn. And I think somebody somewhere needs to start getting to grips with that. For instance, if we converted the entire refuse fleet to electric, we wouldn't be able to charge it at the Alps.
Okay, that's a very good point, Councillor King. And certainly perhaps we need to talk to the National Grid, and perhaps maybe we need to do that for other political avenues. Councillor Drake wants to say something as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Tom, you actually raised it. Would this action plan be coming to corporate resources and E&R? I might have missed that.
My intention is to do that, Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, Chair. This reference is also going on the E&R agenda next month. It was only the volume of business for last night's meeting that meant it's been held over.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is now the sickness absence report. Leif, are you going to cover that?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Chair.
And Tracy as well, who's joined us as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I'm sure she may come in if needs be.
Fine.
So thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Obviously, we're in the Q2 reporting period for sickness absence. I'm always going to start off with a bit of a caveat, I suppose, with this, because it's very difficult to, I suppose, compare with the figures for last year, because of course we weren't in that sort of current COVID situation. So of course, when you look at the figures, it actually reads from a data perspective actually quite healthy. But of course, I think we've got to treat this with a bit of caution in terms of obviously what the situation was in the same period last year, as well as obviously what would look like, in the next 6-12 months or so. If I was just going to obviously just pick up on a few key parts of the Cabinet report, in terms of points sort of 4.1, 4.2, etc. The outcome for Q2 is actually just hitting 3.4 FTE days lost per person. That is actually the lowest figure in the past 5 years, with almost 5,000 days lost less than the same period last year. And again, if we look forward for the next 6 months of that forecasting figure towards the end of the year, we could be hitting around 7 to 8 FTE days lost, which is obviously lower than our 9.2 target at the end of the year. But again, that's going to depend again what happened over the next 6 months. You'll note that the biggest reduction obviously is within our schools, and as mentioned in previous sort of meetings, schools do make up 50% of our workforce, and of course any large reduction in that particular area has a big impact obviously on the overall absence figures corporately. And obviously that is shown obviously further in paragraph 4.8 of the report. With obviously schools going back now in September, following obviously the break and following the sort of COVID situation, it'll be interesting again to see what happens with those absence figures during the next quarter or two. What I'll do actually is jump towards the reasons for absence under 4.12. What actually is quite what probably draw your eye to on that particular table. It shows 15 lines of absences. Line 11 actually is the sort of reason of pandemic. Now, from your perspective, so you may have thought that may have been sort of appear higher up the list, I suppose, with only 192 days lost. Now, partly this is due to during the obviously first 6 months, we did have staff that were shielding, we had staff that were self-isolating, lots of schools obviously that were off during that period. Now, what we do as part of our terms and conditions is not record sickness specifically against staff records, on the basis that that could push staff, depending on their length of service, into half pay, into nil pay. And what we don't want to do is that, as part of the terms and conditions, is to force people back into work, bringing the virus back into the situation of the work environment, and obviously, causing issues that way. So actually, under our terms and conditions, we don't record actual absences specifically against the pandemic for those reasons. Another sort of interesting fact as well about that table, I suppose it's interesting for me as well, was that the percentage of split between long and short-term absence. Normally we hover around the 70-30% split between long-term and short-term absence, but actually what we're seeing here is a split now between 83% long-term and 17% short-term, and that's actually more to do with a larger reduction in short-term absence rather than an increase in long-term absence, rather than the other way around, where you automatically think that the bigger figure is because it's increased, but actually it's a larger increase in short-term absence. What that does, actually, you start looking into a bit more detail, I suppose, and I've tried to mention that a little bit in 4.15, where we talk about presenteeism. I know that's been increasingly reported, in the news and the press and stuff over the last 6 months as well, which again could identify why short-term absence has fallen at a greater level. I suppose normally where staff may have taken some time off work, if they got a cold or a bit of a flu, they may take that time, or if they could have childcare issues and make that decision of whether they're going to take time off to look after the child or take the sick or whatever they do. But actually, I think what we're finding is that because of the staff working remotely, the ability to have that flexible working environment, I think they're using that opportunity just to, keep working, and having that access to online work at their home or wherever they're doing that work from, is sort of increasing that presenteeism. But that's something we definitely need to, I suppose, keep an eye on, to make sure, obviously, from the well-being perspective of our staff, that they should be able to switch off. They should be able to take some time to do what they would normally do if they were in the working sort of office environment. So again, it's just being mindful of that. Of course, we've got some anecdotal evidence of that happening, but we've got to try and work with managers to try and understand, obviously, that in a bit more detail, especially as this sort of situation sort of continues sort of going forward. Also, what we've mentioned in there is about the, I suppose, specifically about the COVID, that we've provided support a lot to our schools, to the pupils as part of our testing regime. We've actually got a small team within the HR function that actually are working on a 7-day rota, 8 till 8, and actually processing all the requests that are coming in from schools for pupils, for staff, family members, for even some of our private care homes as well, in order to manage that I suppose speed of getting people tested. They have their test locally as well, rather than where you see on the news sometimes where people are offered tests 150 miles away. And again, it's just trying to manage that process, I suppose, from a Vale perspective. And to us, that's working really well. Obviously, it is fairly resource intensive, but actually it's something that is working well for the authority. And if people have obviously been either diagnosed or have COVID symptoms, and we can get the test quickly and it comes back negative, then obviously they can come back to work quicker. So I think in the whole scheme of things, it is a good process that takes place. Paragraph 4.21, I think, talks about the top 3 reasons then on long-term, and 4.22 about short-term absence. just go forward to that. A bit like top of the pops, isn't it? Who the top three is in each area. But I think again, this is quite interesting from the long-term perspective. Is that the same period last year that you had stress non-work related, which is the same, very similar percentages. Other musculoskeletal, again in second place for both, but actually operations and recovery was in sort of third place last year, but that's been replaced by stress work related for long-term absence. Now you could argue obviously operations and recovery, there's probably been fewer operations that have taken place again over the past 6 months, so that could well be the reason why that's dropped. And of course stress work related is always near the top anyway, but obviously that's replaced that in the top three. So again, it's something we're mindful of, and obviously trying to work as part of our wellbeing package for employees going forward. And similar thing with the short term, slightly I suppose sort of different figures there. You've got viral stomach ailments and other musculoskeletal, again replaced by viral in top position with stress non-work related musculoskeletal. So again, you've got the stress bit that's been added as the second place in there. So again, it's just being mindful of those situations there. When you move to paragraph 5.2 and 5.3, this is where it specifically talks about our employee assistance programs, where we can offer a number of support mechanisms for our staff, from counselling to other support as well. I think what we're trying to do is actually move away from people thinking that the employee assistance program is just for a counselling service. It is actually a lot more than that. So what we've been trying to do more recently is try to, I suppose, refresh our employee assistance program for both our sort of staff and schools. And actually, although technically outside of our Q2 timescales, we have launched this month, you may have seen, some online sort of fitness programs. We've run some online HIT sessions, which I think stands for high intensity interval training. So I'm not sure if anyone's had to go at that yet. And actually, we've also got a 6-week online yoga class as well that staff can actually undertake. And we run a couple of sessions a week at different times to suit staff that may be busy in the day, especially our schools, that can actually undertake that in the evening as well. So again, we'll see what the response is, see what feedback we get, and again, we'll just see how we can actually increase that going forward for our staff. Obviously, there's not all staff can attend those, so again, it's having access to online videos to do things, I suppose, in their own time. And also, what we've done actually is introduce a financial wellbeing option as well, where staff can speak to financial advisors about any issues, because of course, even though they may be working for us and being paid and doing what they do with the council, they could have partners and stuff that have been affected by the COVID situation as part of their own lifestyle. So again, it's trying to sort of build a picture, I suppose, and an options for everybody that can sort of manage their well-being. And we'll try and increase and build on this going forward. And then finally, really just to mention, you're aware as part of our sort of COVID response for staff specifically, that we increased we actually paid a 10% uplift for our frontline workers, specifically in our social services and environment areas. And actually that was really well received by the staff and by the trade unions. And again, that may also have obviously an impact on some of the absence levels, specifically within those areas. I wouldn't say it's something that we would do all the time, but of course, I think based on where we were at the time and the risk that those staff particularly were facing, and the ability obviously to keep those services running, it was a really positive message sort of going out, obviously, which has now been followed up by the Welsh Government's £500 COVID payment, which we're currently obviously paying the staff now, providers that sort of payment as well. So really, I suppose that was the key bits really as part of the report. Say, well, top level figure, it is a good news story, but I think we've got to treat this with a lot of sort of caution, and obviously see where that takes us over the next sort of six months while we go through the next sort of period of the pandemic, really. So I'd like to offer any questions from either myself or Tracy.
Muted. Councillor Carroll. Councillor Carroll, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Laith, for the presentation. These figures are pretty extraordinary. I appreciate that you've caveated it already, but given that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, what most people I think would consider to be a once in a century type event, with a lot more people getting ill than perhaps would usually be expected, we've not just seen a fall in the number of days lost, but quite a considerable fall as well. So I appreciate that in your presentation there were a lot of you put a caveat on it, and it was very much a case of let's see where we are in the next quarter or the quarter after that. But I'm guessing there must have been some internal analysis done as to why we've seen such a fall, when, if I'm being honest, if you were to have asked me what I would expect to happen during this time period, April to September, I would have expected to see the numbers shoot up. So I would just be keen to know why perhaps yourself or other people in the team think we've seen the opposite, in effect. I find it quite extraordinary, if I'm being honest.
I think Tracy wants to come in here. Do you want to come in, Tracy?
Yes, please, if that's okay, Mark. Thank you.
That's fine.
Yes, we welcome the figures. It's kind of true to say that we welcome the figures in terms of how they've been presented, and we have put considerable caveats to it because we do want to see what happens in the subsequent quarters. But we have reviewed and looked at what might be the causal factors of the reduction, and what we've come to so far is kind of a mix, really, of in operations that are being conducted wider, and therefore we're concerned that potentially moving forward, that once those operations come back into existence, we may see an increase. And that increase we might not necessarily be able to control either, because actually those people will need to have those operations. But we've also put as kind of significant emphasis around the fact that people are working more flexibly, and therefore, in terms of sickness absence, it might have been better for their personal circumstances and their well-being to enable them to be able to do that. So we're not suggesting that people should work when they're ill or poorly, so I will sort of put that huge caveat in, but there is the potential that those individuals who may not have come to work because they were suffering with a cold, for example, may still feel that they're well enough to work in isolation at home. So we are considering those factors as well as a sign that individuals may not have been reporting sickness absence because actually they've been quite content to work. They just wouldn't have wished to have come into the office and exposed people to infection in that way. We're also very mindful that we look at how what this report is telling us moving forward and how we can support people moving forward. So as Laith describes, we've launched our wellbeing proposal around 4 key areas of physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being and financial well-being, with the aim that actually if we've encompassed activities in those 4 areas, we should be able to support people during this very, very difficult period to look after their well-being and support them with activities that will look after their well-being and allow them the opportunity to take time out to do that. So the clear messages that we've been attempting to give across the local authority at this time is actually, if you are working flexibly at home and your hours are elongated by the fact that you're working flexibly at home, it's absolutely fine to take some time out to do a 45-minute yoga session, because actually that would benefit your mental well-being and your physical well-being moving forward. So we're encouraging people to do things like the ergonomic risk assessment, yoga, stretching, online videos that we think, through things that we've identified, could have a longer term absence impact for us across the next 12 to 18 months, because we know there's things that we're just not going to be able to control.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tracy, on that. I know Vince wants to come in, Councillor John Thomas. So Councillor Driscoll, first of all.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, good. Leith, it'd be interesting to know if there was any drop in the absenteeism in the frontline workers, i.e. the dustbin men and people like that, or is it just a drop in people that were actually working from home?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think you're quite right. I think actually the frontline workers' absence remained fairly stable compared to last year. So obviously we didn't see the bigger increase that we would have seen in schools and other areas. But actually what it did show is that, you know, it didn't have the huge increase that maybe, as you're quite right, we're expecting to see as part of a sort of a pandemic, really. Now, whether that was, you know, again, as Tracy mentioned, we've been trying to support the staff through numerous sort of activities, and that includes the frontline staff. And yes, and whether the 10% uplift, I don't always like to think that pay or bonuses is a reason why people don't go off. But I think at the time, I think it was the right thing to do, and maybe that did provide some assurances for those frontline workers that we were, you know, thinking about them and supporting them. So yes, there wasn't a huge increase as it was expected to be.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, the next person now is Councillor John Thomas.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, is there any evidence that there's less sort of general disease circulating within our staff and within the community due to the fact that we're all shielded, all social distancing to avoid getting coronavirus? I know personally I haven't had a common cold, which I'd normally get 2 or 3 in over a 3 or 4 month period. I haven't had one since March, since we started social distancing. So is there any evidence that that is having an effect? Or is it just my imagination running wild with me?
No, that's a very good question, and I'm probably the same boat as you as well. I've had a cold, touch wood, since this all started. Yeah, I think you're probably right. We have seen less sort of in terms of the normal sort of common cold viruses coming through, which again, you're quite right. Because people aren't mixing and going out, then obviously that's going to reduce that. But I think, as you're quite right, as people start doing more and you know, getting out and about, obviously since the fire break has finished as well, even though we're still trying to limit the contact. I think the message is still out there, especially from our work perspective. You know, if you can work from home, continue to do so. You know, don't come into the office unless you really need to. So that's still the message that we're providing the staff and giving them the support and the technology and the systems in order to still continue to work from home until obviously we can obviously get a hold of this virus in a much more sort of, you know, better way, especially with the vaccine. Eventually that will come through. That helps. It probably doesn't answer, but
well, yeah, no, it does answer the question. I think it'll be interesting to see when we do start sort of moving around more socially again, whether there is an increase in the common colds and flus and that sort of thing, which you know, I think we're getting the benefit of the social distancing for other reasons other than coronavirus. So. Yeah, good. Thanks, Leith.
Okay. Tracy, did you want to respond to that? Can't hear you. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, please, Councillor Wilson, if you don't mind. So
that's fine.
just in terms of that, Councillor Thomas, we have seen that reduction in the local authority quite clearly. There is some research currently being undertaken by Cardiff University on whether there has been a reduction in viruses in general. But we won't know the result of that as yet. But we are keeping our eye on that to see if that is true. But one thing I will just kind of say though is that obviously we're managing the testing process through for the Vale and Cardiff and the Vale as a region, and the numbers that we're sending through for testing are bringing a return back of anything between 1% and at its highest a couple of weeks ago near 15%, which would suggest that even at its highest, 85% of those that we were putting through had other viruses that were not coronavirus. So what that could suggest to us is that those individuals are still choosing to work from home, but maybe self-isolating if they're frontline for that short period, and then are returning when their result is negative. So it was just to provide that sort of greater context that we know that there's research being undertaken wider to see if there is a reduction in viral spread in general. But actually the volumes of people we're putting through in testing would still suggest that those common colds and viruses are there.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Burnett, do you want to come in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. If I could, it was just to comment a couple of things really. One is that we are, as we know, in very difficult and unprecedented times, and there are high levels of anxiety and mental health challenges for the population in general, and so our staff would be no different. The other side of that is that we have got an awful lot of frontline staff who are out and about delivering public services day in, day out, and we can be sitting in our houses participating in meetings, but we don't know. They are wondering if they are putting themselves at risk of catching the virus virtually every day. They've got all the necessary PPE, they've got all the necessary preventative measures, but there is a side to that. The knock on in terms of the testing, if people do think that they have symptoms, and the way in which the staff have been able to turn around testing so quickly, actually, apart from being good to get a test result and know where you stand, that's also got a very personal impact, because not knowing whether or not you are positive for COVID-19 is again creates a lot of anxiety, and being able to tell people, no, you're okay. It's for 85% of people at the minimum, that no, it's okay. It's a different virus. Everything's fine. Must have a beneficial effect. So I think to Tracy and the team who've been turning around those tests so quickly, I know people that have contacted the team in the morning, had a test in the afternoon, and had the result back the following day. Superb outcome on that. But I think I also would say that it has been difficult for many of our staff, and I think many have probably worked through sort of minor illnesses because they didn't want to let colleagues down. I've seen people juggling children on their laps, trying to continue doing work. I've met so many people's children through virtual meetings. That in itself is very stressful, but also the amount of work that people have been doing over this period, out of choice, I have to say, but the amount of work and the dedication that they've shown, we have to make sure that we support them so it doesn't take a toll. And the types of facilities that have and support has been being put on IDEV has been really super. And I was pleased to hear that we're actually looking at mindfulness as well, if we can. And I think that will be super. So I don't think we've got enough data at the moment to say that we have a definitive view, but I think it's something that we need to look at very, very carefully to see what lessons we can learn, and how we can further support our staff and try and maintain something like these levels, which are pleasing for us, but also good for staff that aren't ill.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Burnett, on that. Okay, Aruba wants to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Laith and Tracy, because I think it's incredibly encouraging, you know, what you've shown us this evening. And I think the point that you're both making is that, you know, this is you know, the whole lockdown scenario has created something very new for the council, and we had to work, you know, you had to work very quickly to adapt to that, and you've demonstrated that you've done that really well, with the support for staff, staff's well-being, and so on. And I think going forward, what we do know is that this may well be a permanent feature, so that we do have to put in place all the things that you've already you're already doing, and you know, and other support mechanisms and other ways of monitoring, you know, people's output and you know, their well-being and so on. So I'm really encouraged by this, and so, you know, thank you very much, and thank you to your teams.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cox now. Jeff.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, the coronavirus has placed restrictions on all of us, and I was wondering what limitations this has placed on the training and support we can give to our employees, and perhaps you could illustrate the ways in which we've tried to overcome some of these limitations.
Do you want to respond to that good question there from Councillor Cox? I think it's a very good question. Do you want to come in, Leif or Tracy? Tracy, you want to come in on that?
Yes, then I'm happy to. So, Councillor Cox, I'll probably give you an example of what we've tried to attempt to do with training and training provision. So, we very quickly established that we would need to repurpose staff into certain areas on our front line to offer those additional support, and we were quite aware that we didn't want them to be repurposed without the necessary training. So one example of that could be manual handling based training, for example. And we've got a dedicated manual handling trainer within the council who worked with us in the repurposing team and trained every single individual that we had to be able to be capable and skilled enough to go and perform those frontline roles. We've also put I'll use the term training very loosely, but we've also put a number of modules on our IDEV system that support our staff members to look at resources such as mindfulness and also burnout. So they can ensure that they are kind of keeping themselves upskilled and abreast of things and can identify things before they come about. So certainly from the IADEV perspective with the burnout module, lots of people have come forward to say that they found that quite insightful and have taken some of the learnings from it to adapt to how they work now moving forward. So we're not getting it all perfect. So there are some things with training that we've had to park for the moment because they haven't been the priority for us. But we are trying to ensure that we continue to develop and upskill our people during what is a very tricky period for us right now.
Okay, Jeff, do you want to respond to any of that? No. Okay. Any other member wants to respond? Okay, Councillor Drake.
Right. Thank you very much for this report, which was much more positive than I thought it would be. We are in unprecedented times, which is causing a lot of stress to a lot of people. And many through watching the media and all the gloomy projections. So you can understand why this does affect their well-being. Unfortunately, I had a very sad case with my neighbour 4 weeks ago. Her granddaughter who lives with her, she'd been furloughed, then she was made redundant. She just couldn't cope with things anymore. And unfortunately, 4 weeks ago, she took her life. So, and she was only 20. So, you know, you've got to think of these things, you know, and I hope when people do have this kind of stress that they seek help straight away. And I hope our council's there for them if they come up with those kind of things. Sorry to give you that gloomy tale, but it was very, very distressing.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Councillor Drake. I mean, we must remember that employees of the council, have got lives outside work, and I do think it's very important that people realise that. And actually, I was thinking that some people, I've seen pictures with their pets, for example, and actually pets really help people in their mental well-being. And I've seen many people stroking a cat and whatever, and that's very relaxing, not just for the cat often, but often for the human being as well. So I do think, it's important that people bring that. I know organisations such as Google actually encourage people to bring their pets to work. Whether we're going to do that at the Vale Council, who knows? But I also do think that perhaps the human element is important as well. I think obviously going forward, we're hoping there'll be a vaccine available in the not too distant future, that when people do return back to work, perhaps people will welcome more social engagement than they've had recently. And I know that in many places there are sort of social areas, and perhaps maybe we could be looking to redesign some of our workspaces. So there are some sort of social areas where people can play table football, for example. Obviously that needs to be regulated, because otherwise everyone will be playing table football. But I do think that's the sort of thing perhaps going forward we could be looking at. And the other things I mentioned is about the well-being aspect. Really delighted that yoga there, but also I wondered, Patsy, one is important that Pilates could be made available as well, because that is very good for musculoskeletal issues as well. Also, I was thinking as well is that I know that many organisations I'm aware of also provide people with chairs and perhaps even tables which are more ergonomically designed. And I wonder, perhaps, are we doing a bit of work like that? I just wondered if you want to come in on that, Tracy.
So yeah, firstly on thank you, Councillor Winston. Firstly on the ergonomic assessment, so we are encouraging everybody that works from home to undertake an ergonomic risk assessment. We haven't managed to achieve 100% of that as yet, and we continue to work with it. Depending on what that ergonomic assessment says, then yes, we are providing them with the equipment that they need to be able to work safely. And we're doing that through our health and safety team so that it's appropriately assessed, as opposed to individuals purchasing equipment that might not be suitable for them. From the different fitness aspects, yes, Pilates is something that we would like to offer. We've also extended out to people to come forward and suggest activities that they might like to see taking place. So we don't just have yoga, we've got Tai Chi, for instance, that's also on offer. And our exercise referral team have been absolutely fantastic in supporting us with this programme. So they've got a number of pre-recorded sessions that have got stretching exercises for those that are working from home and also those that are frontline. It really is us now just trying to ensure that we get those messages to those individuals so that they know where to access this resource.
I think it might be also good if we can put those classes on MemberNet, just in case members may want to join them as well. Okay, wonderful. I got a thumbs up there from Leif. That's great. Terrific. And can I look? I've got no one else is contributing, so I'm going to go to the recommendations. Are you happy to refer the comments that we made back to Cabinet for consideration? And are you also happy that we have a further report coming up in the next quarter to look at comparison to see how well things are going in terms of this and whether this is part of a new trend with COVID, or perhaps bearing in mind, especially the schools data, would the schools data go up? So I'd be quite interested to see that, notably in schools going forward, and to see. And also, obviously, the stress issue is going to be an important one for a while. But I'm hoping that with the vaccine and everything else changing, people will feel a bit more relaxed about going forward, perhaps on this, if they can see an end in sight of this pandemic. And perhaps, that will be a good focus. So will there be a more data coming up, perhaps in looking at in the spring? We can bring this report back. Is that okay, Tracy and Leif?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Are we all happy to endorse that as well, committee? Thank you very much. Okay, can we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is now audit wells? Okay. All right, Dan. And I know that we got Ian Phillips on the line from Audit Wells, and I'm wondering perhaps is he going to front this report?
Yes, Chair. I'm going to present the report.
Thank
and
you.
Then I think Tom's going to do the response to it.
Thank you.
This project was from our 2019-20 programme of work. We were looking to answer the overarching question of whether the council has effective arrangements in place to deliver its reshaping services programme. You'll see the report stated August 2020, but the fieldwork actually finished in February 2020. Ordinarily, this would have come before yourselves around springtime. Now, it's an understatement to say a lot's happened in the meantime, but this is the picture we found at the time that we finished the fieldwork. As the covering report says, our findings were generally positive, and we found a number of strengths. These were: the council's made progress in meeting the 3 objectives it has for the Reshaping Services programme. The programme has helped deliver savings. The council has effective arrangements in place to govern and manage the programme. And the support from human resources for individual projects within the programme is valued. However, there was a desire to repurpose the programme going forward to focus more on transformation. As time has gone by, the programme has become more primarily focused on savings. It was recognised there was more work to do around the 3rd objective of the programme, which is to develop the council and its partners to ensure they're able to meet future challenges. There's an opportunity to strengthen workforce planning in respect of the programme. We had 5 proposals for improvement. They're set out on page 5 of the report. I won't read them out verbatim, but the first one is about developing the partnership working objective of the programme. The second one is about reviewing the criteria about how projects are selected for the programme and then measured, because the council, as I say, wants to move away from projects primarily having a savings focus. The third is about training and supporting staff in terms of skills needed for transformational change. The fourth proposal for improvement is that the new iteration of the workforce plan supports the delivery of the programme. And the fifth one is for the council to ensure lessons are learned from earlier projects to help to mitigate any identified areas of weakness in future. So it's just a quick run through the report. I'm happy to answer questions, but I don't know if you want to go to Tom now for the response to the report first, but I'm happy either way. Thank you.
Tom, do you want to come in now?
Okay, thank you, Chair. In the report, you'll see that there's an action plan which has been appended. That sets out for each of the proposals for improvement what Cabinet have endorsed in terms of, what we've suggested in terms of our response to the proposals for improvement. I think Ian's point of a lot has happened is the understatement of the evening. Actually, it is a really good opportunity around transformation. Councillor, you just mentioned about the vaccine coming. That's cause for cheer. Cause for cheer that we'll have a new transformational change programme focus as well. And this is a real opportunity now to do some of the things that we've been talking about in recent months. So there's a commitment within the recovery strategy around looking at how we take forward the relationship with the third sector, building on the legacy of Vale Heroes. The work he's just been describing in terms of well-being support, and also the way that the workforce has really stepped up, and the support that is needed is going to be reflected in the workforce plan. And the action plan also sets out our response in terms of the criteria, and I'm going to be running a session with the strategic leadership team next week to talk about the criteria and actually how do we identify the projects that are truly transformational, and they are things that are associated with some of the topics we've talked about this evening, learning from coronavirus and reflecting back on that, things like climate change that require a real change to the way that we work and operate as an organisation. And also, I'm grateful for the work that Ian is doing with us around the third sector. There's some field work underway currently to give us some independent assessment of how our relationship with the third sector and community groups is operating to help shape some of that future direction. So. That's the action plan that we're taking forward. And in terms of the next iteration of the reshaping programme or the transformational change programme, more details will be shared with committee and cabinet now in the coming months as we start to put some proper shape on that.
Okay, thank you. Open to members now. Okay, any member wants to speak on this? Okay, well, in that case, I was going to ask a question then. In relation, I think Karen wants to come in. Do you want to come in, Karen? Karen?
No, sorry, Chair, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you. Okay, can I refer to P4 on Appendix B, which is obviously the response to the proposals for the improvement. I note P4 in particular about the workforce plan. For obviously future transformational change. I just wondered if that's going to come to this committee for us to consider that. I just wonder if that's going to happen, Tom.
Yes, certainly. I know that Tracy has been doing a significant amount of work on that strategy and on that plan rather, and certainly the intention would be to bring it to Scrutiny Committee as part of that approval process.
Excellent. That's good news. Has anyone else got any comments? Councillor Johnson does now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Ian and Tom for the report. Very briefly, just two things. I wanted to just queries to get a bit more information on that work with the third sector. I'm just wondering what that looks like. I mean, is that a benchmarking exercise with what's going on elsewhere, or looking at best practice? The other was that just more generally within the context of this report, some of the examples that, and this is now a programme that's been underway for 6 years within this council, and it's I think a large number of projects, many of which have been about reducing costs. Have been given the reshaping services badge in that 6 years. I'm just a little bit dubious about actually what some of our positive examples include. The first two that we've provided as good examples of success involve community libraries, which may be a success, but have prospectively been us transferring services that we provided onto local communities to provide instead. And the other is the setting up of the commercial catering company, which is something that's been done. But as those of us on audit will know, there was a lot of red flags thrown around around that. And there's not yet really evidence, I don't feel, of success, which is partly because it's quite new and we've obviously had a very wretched year. So I just think that there's a lot of work that's been done under reshaping services. I'm not sure that those are the first two that I would flag up as successes from my perspective, whereas I think that the work that's gone into our neighbourhood services, etc., I think is far more impactful in terms of actually reshaping services, and it is something that obviously many people on this committee have been on this council for a long time. We have sort of raised this issue of conflation of cost cutting with doing things differently, and I think we were quite glad when we heard Section 151 officer sort of talking in the run up to the last budget about shifting that emphasis from trying to find savings to moving into actually how can we do this better, which I think is the argument that some of us have made all along, that it should always be about doing things better. That's what reshaping services is, not a cost-cutting programme.
Okay.
I'm happy to come in on that. In terms of the third sector work that is ongoing at the moment. We're essentially, the main question that's being sought to be answered is whether the council's arrangement with the third sector are effectively supporting the council to achieve its strategic recovery priorities. So it's got that forward-looking focus to the recently set strategic recovery priorities. We are, as part of that, we are also looking at more of an arrangement side of things. Also, in terms of the administrative side of third sector funding, also learning from the pandemic, what learning can be used to strengthen the council's relationship with the third sector going forward, and also about arrangements to monitor and evaluate the performance and impact of third sector services. So that work is ongoing at the moment, and we're looking to produce a report in the first quarter, early in the new year, really. So that's the aim currently. Appreciate it. Now it's a difficult time. Yeah, in terms of your other point about whether they're good examples, I think it's interesting that it was really related to the actual first aspect of the reshaping services objectives. To identify alternative ways of delivering services. And so we were given those examples of where there had been alternative service delivery. But I think it's an interesting point on, there's definitely some debate on what is genuinely transformation, what can actually be badged a transformational project. And with the catering company point, I think, you mentioned that had gone to audit committee, and that's related to some of the lessons learned. I think that when there's a new initiative such as that the council should make sure that it learns lessons for any future work, and we had the catering company situation in mind for that, really. So it wasn't really to rubber stamp those projects as like great examples of transformation. It was more to just highlight where there had been alternative service delivery, as opposed to some of the projects that perhaps as time went on in the reshaping services programme were more just sort of savings plans under another name.
Okay, does anyone want to respond? Okay, anyone else wants to say anything at all? Okay, now can I go back to the recommendations here? I mean, obviously we got comments that can go to cabinet from here, but also this will now go to audit committee, I understand, as well. So I know that quite a few of us are also members of the audit committee, and I'd rather talk about certain issues which I know in reference to that, which are really the property of the audit committee. So I will keep quiet on certain other projects which I know are going on. So I'm not going to discuss that. Okay, but can we move those recommendations? Happy to move that 1 and 2. Okay. Can I have okay. I got no other items on the agenda, which is agenda item 7, and nothing under part 2. Can I thank you all for attending this meeting, and thank you all. Okay, and it's sometimes nice to be guinea pigs, and I mean that in terms of being the first Microsoft Council meeting using Teams. Okay, and can I thank Democratic in particular for a very smooth transition on this meeting. Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye, and stay safe. Thank you all.
And bye-bye to John's dog as well.
Yes, absolutely. John's dog was one of the